Montana Territory, 1872. The wind carried the scent of pine and spring rain as Elijah Whitaker stood on the porch of the main house, watching his two sons chase each other around the corral. At 42, with 15 years of widowhood carving lines into his face, he'd forgotten how to laugh the way they did, without restraint. The Diamond W Ranch had prospered under his careful stewardship, but the hollow space inside him remained unfilled despite the sprawling 500 acres and growing herd. "Pa, Lucas says I can't ride Thunder tomorrow." 10-year-old Michael's indignant voice carried across the yard. Lucas, all of 13 and already taking after his father in both height and seriousness, placed his hands on his hips. "He threw you last time." Elijah sighed. They needed more than he could give them. Ever since Margaret died bringing Michael into the world, he'd done his best, but boys needed a mother's touch. The ranch hands were good men, but they couldn't replace what was missing. "I'll discuss it with both of you over supper," Elijah called back, checking his pocket watch. Nearly 5 o'clock. Miss Tessa Sullivan would be arriving on the afternoon stage any minute now. The new schoolteacher from Boston had written ahead requesting lodging until the schoolhouse and attached living quarters were completed in town. He hadn't intended to offer, but Mrs. Patterson at the general store had intercepted the letter and practically insisted. "That big house of yours sits half empty, Elijah Whitaker, and those boys of yours need civilizing influence." The truth was, the Diamond West was the only place that could decently house a single woman without causing talk. The thought of a stranger disrupting their routine made his stomach churn, but the boys needed schooling, and the ranch was only a 30-minute ride from town. The distant rumble of wheels caught his attention. Right on time. He straightened his collar, brushed dust from his vest, and called to the boys. "Come on now. Miss Sullivan's arriving." The stagecoach appeared around the bend in the road, for horses pulling it through the last stretch to the ranch house. Elijah stepped down from the porch, his sons flanking him on either side. "Is she old like Mrs. Patterson?" Michael whispered. "Hush now," Elijah admonished as the coach rolled to a stop. The driver, old Sam McClintock, tipped his hat. "Afternoon, Mr. Whitaker. Got your guest here safe and sound from Billings." He jumped down and opened the door with a flourish that seemed overdone for their remote location. A gloved hand appeared first, followed by the most striking woman Elijah had ever seen. Her chestnut hair was pinned neatly beneath a modest bonnet, but a few rebellious curls had escaped around her temples. Her traveling dress of deep blue complemented fair skin that hadn't yet faced the Montana sun. But it was her eyes that seized his attention, intelligent, direct, and the color of summer sage. "Miss Sullivan, I presume?" Elijah found his voice, stepping forward to offer assistance. She took his hand, her grip firmer than he expected. "Mr. Whitaker, thank you for your hospitality. I hope I'm not imposing too greatly." "Not at all." He found himself staring and quickly averted his gaze. "These are my sons, Lucas and Michael." To his surprise, she crouched down despite her fine dress, addressing the boys at eye level. "I'm delighted to meet you both. I've heard Montana raises the finest young men in the territory." Michael's face split into a grin, while Lucas regarded her with cautious curiosity. "Can you ride horses, Miss Sullivan?" Michael blurted out. "Michael," Elijah started, but Tessa laughed, a sound like silver bells on a clear morning. "I grew up riding in Vermont, though I suspect your western horses might be a bit more spirited than I'm accustomed to." She straightened, brushing invisible dust from her skirts. "Perhaps you could teach me the differences." The boy beamed as if she'd handed him the moon. Sam unloaded her trunks, two modest cases that suggested a practical woman rather than a frivolous one. Elijah carried them inside while she thanked the driver, pressing a coin into his weathered palm despite his protests. "The east bedroom is prepared for you," Elijah explained as he led her inside. "It has its own washroom. We've arranged for water to be brought up." Tessa paused in the entryway, taking in the high-ceilinged great room with its stone fireplace and sturdy furniture. Elijah suddenly saw his home through a stranger's eyes, functional but sparse, lacking the feminine touches that had gradually disappeared after Margaret's death. "It's a beautiful home, Mr. Whitaker," she said sincerely. "Thank you for opening it to me." "Supper's at 6, he said gruffly, embarrassed by both her gratitude and his awareness of the home's shortcomings. "Mrs. Jenkins comes in to cook and clean. She'll show you anything you need." As he carried her trunks upstairs, Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just changed in his carefully ordered world. What exactly that might be, he wasn't yet ready to consider. Tessa Sullivan unpinned her bonnet with trembling fingers. The journey from Boston had been exhausting, but it was the intensity of Elijah Whitaker's blue eyes that had her heart racing now. She hadn't expected her host to be so imposing, tall and broad-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed beard showing threads of silver among the brown. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who knew his place in the world. She moved to the window, looking out at the sweeping view of mountains and grassland. What would her family in Boston think if they could see her now? The wayward Sullivan daughter, trading drawing rooms for wide-open spaces and propriety for adventure. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Sullivan?" A boy's voice, Michael's, called through the door. "Pa says to tell you supper's almost ready. And Lucas says your bags are probably too heavy, and do you need help unpacking?" Tessa smiled at the transparent attempt to see inside her room. "Thank you, Michael. Please tell your father and brother I'll be down shortly, and my bags are quite manageable." "Yes, ma'am." There was a pause. "Miss Sullivan?" "Yes." "Do you know any stories? About knights and dragons and such?" "Pa tries, but he always falls asleep before the good parts." The simple request revealed volumes about this household of men. "I know many stories, Michael. Perhaps after supper, if your father approves." The sound of delighted footsteps retreating down the hallway made her smile. She changed quickly into a simpler dress of sage green, hesitated over her jewelry box, then selected only a modest cameo brooch. She wasn't here to impress anyone, she reminded herself. She was here to teach, to make a difference, and to leave behind the disappointments of Boston. When she descended the stairs, she found all three Whitaker men waiting awkwardly in the dining room, freshly washed and in clean shirts. The table was set with mismatched china that nonetheless had been carefully arranged. "Miss Sullivan," Elijah nodded formally, pulling out her chair. "I hope you found everything satisfactory upstairs." "More than satisfactory. The view is breathtaking." She settled into her seat, careful not to betray how aware she was of his proximity. Mrs. Jenkins, a plump woman with a no-nonsense manner, served a hearty meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread. The conversation flowed more easily than Tessa had feared, with Michael peppering her with questions about Boston and Lucas gradually unbending enough to ask about the books she planned to teach from. "Will we learn about explorers?" Lucas asked. "I've been reading about Lewis and Clark." "Absolutely. Geography and history will be important subjects." Tessa took a sip of water. "Though I must admit, reading about the West in Boston is very different from experiencing it firsthand." "Is that why you came?" Elijah's deep voice drew her attention. "For the experience?" There was something in his tone, not accusation exactly, but wariness. She realized he was trying to determine if she was merely another Eastern dilettante who would flee back to civilization at the first hardship. "Partly," she answered honestly. "But mostly I came because teaching means something here. In Boston, my students had governesses and private tutors. Here, education makes a real difference in children's futures." She didn't mention the broken engagement, the whispers that followed her through Boston society, or her father's disappointment when she declined Walter Harrington's second proposal. Some secrets were better left buried 2,000 miles east. Elijah studied her for a long moment, then nodded slightly as if he'd reached some private conclusion. "The school board is grateful to have you. Building should be finished within 3 weeks. Pa." Lucas leaned forward. "Couldn't Miss Sullivan stay here even after the schoolhouse is done? It's a long ride to town, and the Jennings place got raided by wolves last winter. It wouldn't be safe for her alone." Michael immediately brightened. "Yes, she could have lessons right here and teach us first, and then ride into town for the other children." Tessa nearly choked on her water at the bold suggestion. Elijah's ears reddened slightly. "Lucas, that's presumptuous. Miss Sullivan will want her privacy once the schoolhouse is complete." He turned to her. "My apologies for the boy's forwardness." "No apology necessary," she assured him, though her pulse had quickened at the idea. "It's kind of them to be concerned for my welfare." But the seed had been planted. As Mrs. Jenkins served apple cobbler, Michael launched into an elaborate explanation of why the east bedroom was much safer than the schoolhouse, while Lucas, more subtly, mentioned the advantages of having their lessons at home before the other students. Watching the boy's transparent machinations, Tessa caught Elijah's eye. The corner of his mouth lifted in a barely-there smile that transformed his serious face, creating crinkles around his eyes that suggested the man he might have been before loss hardened him. For just a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a shared amusement at the boy's plotting, perhaps, or a mutual recognition of loneliness recognized in another's soul. Then Elijah cleared his throat, and the moment vanished. "If you'll excuse me, I need to check the north pasture before dark. Boys, help Mrs. Jenkins clear the table." He stood, nodded politely to Tessa, and departed. As she watched him stride away through the window, Tessa wondered what she had gotten herself into. She'd come to Montana to escape one man's unwanted attention, only to find herself unsettled by another's careful distance. The first week established a rhythm. Tessa began preliminary lessons with the boys each morning, evaluated their education to date, and spent afternoons preparing curriculum for when the school term officially began. Elijah maintained a polite but reserved demeanor, often leaving before dawn to work the ranch and returning after the boys were asleep. On Saturday, Lucas approached her as she sat on the porch with a book. "Miss Sullivan, Pa's taking us into town for supplies. Would you like to come along?" Tessa looked up from her novel. "That's kind of you to ask, Lucas. I would like to see the progress on the schoolhouse." When Elijah brought the wagon around, he seemed mildly surprised to see her waiting with the boys. "Miss Sullivan will be joining us," Lucas announced before his father could speak. "I see." Elijah offered his hand to help her up. "Town can be a bit rough on Saturdays with the ranch hands getting their pay." "I'm sure I'll manage," she replied, settling her skirts around her. "I taught in the poor districts of Boston before coming west. Very little surprises me anymore." His eyebrows rose slightly at this new information. "Is that so?" The ride into town revealed more about the Whitakers' standing in the community. Everyone they passed tipped their hats or called greetings, and Elijah responded to each with respectful acknowledgement. Though not talkative, he wasn't the cold, unapproachable man she'd initially thought. Rather, he carried the quiet dignity of someone who'd earned respect through actions rather than words. Sweetwater was a small but growing settlement. A main street lined with essential businesses, several cross streets with modest homes, and the half-finished schoolhouse standing proudly at the eastern edge of town. Elijah pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the general store. "I need to speak with the blacksmith," he said. "Lucas, help your brother and Miss Sullivan with the supply list." Inside the store, Tessa was immediately surrounded by curious women eager to meet the new schoolteacher. Mrs. Patterson, the storekeeper's wife, was particularly effusive. "We're so pleased you've come, Miss Sullivan. The children need proper schooling if Sweetwater is to grow." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "And how are you finding your accommodations at the Diamond W?" Elijah Whitaker is a good man, if somewhat reserved since his Margaret passed. "Mr. Whitaker and his sons have been perfect gentlemen," Tessa replied diplomatically, sensing gossip beneath the innocent inquiry. "The ranch is beautiful." "Indeed." Mrs. Patterson's eyes twinkled. Many a young widow has set her cap for Elijah over the years, but those boys of his guard him like dragons with treasure. "First time I've seen them take to anyone, I must say." Before Tessa could formulate a response that wouldn't encourage such speculation, a commotion outside drew their attention. Raised voices, then the unmistakable sound of a punch landing. Lucas, who had been examining fishing hooks nearby, dashed outside with Tessa following close behind. In the street, Elijah stood face to face with a red-faced man in expensive but trail-worn clothes. "You have no business here, Thornton," Elijah was saying, his voice dangerously calm despite the gathering crowd. The matter was settled in court. "Nothing's settled." The man, Thornton, spat on the ground. "You think that fancy paper from some territorial judge means anything? That was my land." "It was government land you tried to steal through false paperwork," Elijah countered. "You lost fair and square." Thornton lunged forward, but two ranch hands intercepted him. "This isn't over, Whitaker. A man doesn't forget when his livelihood is stolen." "Take your grievances to the territorial office," Elijah replied evenly, "and stay away from my family." As the man was escorted toward the saloon, Elijah turned and noticed Tessa and the boys watching. His expression tightened. "Lucas, finish the shopping. We're heading back early." The ride home was tense, with Michael unusually quiet and Lucas shooting worried glances at his father. Tessa waited until the boys had gone inside before approaching Elijah as he unhitched the horses. "I don't mean to pry," she began carefully, "but the children seem upset by what happened. Is there any danger?" Elijah's hands stilled on the harness. "Thornton's all talk. 2 years ago, he tried to forge documents claiming part of what's now the Diamond W. The court ruled against him." "I see." She hesitated, then added, "The boys might feel better if you explained that to them directly." He looked at her sharply. "I don't need advice on raising my sons, Miss Sullivan." The rebuke stung more than it should have. "Of course, I overstepped." She turned to leave, but his voice, softer now, stopped her. "Tessa, Miss Sullivan, I apologize. That was unfair." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. "You're right," he continued. "The boys should hear the truth from me, not town gossip. I'm just not accustomed to sharing my concerns." "No apology necessary, Mr. Whitaker." She offered a small smile. "Parenting is difficult enough without unsolicited advice from the schoolteacher." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Elijah, if you're to be staying under my roof, you might as well use my name." "Elijah," she repeated, testing the feel of it. Their eyes held for a moment longer than propriety dictated before she looked away. "I should help Mrs. Jenkins with supper." As she walked back to the house, Tessa could feel his gaze following her. The encounter in town had revealed layers to the stoic rancher she hadn't glimpsed before. His restraint in the face of provocation, the respect he commanded, and most intriguingly, a protective instinct that extended beyond his sons. What would it be like, she wondered, to be included in that protection permanently? The thought ambushed her, unbidden and inappropriate, yet impossible to dismiss entirely. The Sunday morning sun filtered through lace curtains, waking Elijah earlier than his usual dawn rising. For several moments, he lay still, listening to the unusual quiet of the house. No ranch hands shouting in the yard, no cattle lowing in the distance. Just the soft Montana morning and the knowledge that somewhere under this roof, Tessa Sullivan was also beginning her day. 3 weeks she'd been with them now, and already he couldn't imagine the house without her presence. The way she hummed while reviewing the boys' lessons, her laughter joining theirs during evening games of checkers, even the subtle floral scent that lingered in rooms she'd recently occupied, all had become part of the fabric of their lives. It unsettled him deeply. He rose and dressed mechanically, his mind circling the same thoughts that had kept him awake much of the night. The schoolhouse was nearly complete. Within days, she would move into town, taking with her whatever magic had transformed his sons these past weeks. Lucas smiled more easily. Michael's nightmares had ceased, and even Elijah found himself looking forward to suppers where conversation flowed instead of awkward silence. Downstairs, he found her already in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up as she taught Michael how to make flapjacks. "You need to wait until the bubbles form before you flip it," she was explaining, guiding his small hands with the spatula. She wore a simple dress of cornflower blue, her hair loosely braided down her back, less formal than her teaching attire, yet still perfectly proper. "Good morning," he said, feeling strangely like an intruder in his own kitchen. She turned, a smile brightening her face. "Elijah, we're making breakfast today to give Mrs. Jenkins a rest. I hope that's all right." "More than all right." He poured himself coffee from the pot warming on the stove. "Where's Lucas?" "Still dressing, I expect. He was up late reading the book on astronomy I lent him." Michael proudly flipped a flapjack with minimal assistance. "Pa, Miss Sullivan says maybe we could all go on a picnic after church today, since it's so fine out." "Can we?" Elijah hesitated. Church followed by a family picnic. It was exactly the sort of Sunday he and Margaret had once planned for their future. The kind of normal family activity he'd never quite managed to provide for his sons alone. "I don't want to impose on your day of rest," Tessa added quickly, misinterpreting his silence. "It was just a thought." "No, it's a fine idea." He found himself agreeing before he'd fully decided. The ridge overlooking Eagle Creek would be perfect. Michael whooped with delight, nearly upsetting the bowl of batter, while Tessa steadied it with a laugh. The domestic scene struck Elijah with unexpected force. This was what his house had been missing. Not just a woman's touch, but this particular woman's warmth. The thought followed him through church services, where he found himself watching her more than listening to Reverend Thomas's sermon. The way she helped old Mrs. Grady find the right hymn page. How she bent to answer a child's whispered question with genuine interest. The respectful attention she gave the sermon, occasionally nodding in agreement. Several times, he caught Lucas studying him with an unusually thoughtful expression. His older son was becoming too observant by half. The picnic that afternoon unfolded like a scene from someone else's life. Tessa had packed a basket with cold chicken, fresh bread, early strawberries, and lemonade. They spread blankets on the grassy ridge overlooking the creek, where spring runoff had created a gentle cascade over smooth stones. After eating, Michael convinced Tessa to help him search for interesting rocks along the creek bank. Elijah watched them from the blanket, the boy's excited chatter carrying on the breeze as he pointed out treasures for her inspection. She treated each discovery with the same enthusiasm, whether it was a unique quartz crystal or an ordinary piece of slate. Pa. Lucas's voice broke into his thoughts. The boy had settled beside him, long legs stretched out in unconscious imitation of his father's posture. I've been thinking. Lucas twisted a blade of grass between his fingers. About Miss Sullivan. Elijah tensed. What about her? She likes it here. Not just teaching, but here with us. Lucas kept his eyes on the distant mountains. And Michael hasn't had a single nightmare since she came. Miss Sullivan is a calming presence, Elijah agreed cautiously, uncertain where this conversation was heading. She's patient with my questions, even the difficult ones. And she doesn't treat me like a child, but she doesn't expect me to be a man yet either. Lucas finally looked at him directly. She's perfect, Pa. The simple declaration hung in the air between them. Perfect for what, exactly? Elijah asked, though he suspected he knew. For us. Lucas's directness was startling. For you. Elijah nearly choked. Lucas, that's not. I see how you look at her when you think no one's watching. His son continued relentlessly. And I remember how you used to look at Ma in the portraits. It's the same. Denial rose to Elijah's lips, then died unspoken. He wouldn't lie to his son, especially about something this important. Even if that were true, a man doesn't simply. It's complicated, Lucas. Why? You're not promised to anyone else. Neither is she. Lucas frowned. Unless there's someone back in Boston? That's not for us to speculate about. Elijah ran a hand through his hair. Miss Sullivan came here to teach, not to find a husband. But if she wanted one? If she wanted you. Lucas persisted. Down by the creek, Tessa's laughter rang out as Michael demonstrated skipping stones, his previous failures forgotten in the triumph of making one bounce twice. You and your brother are plotting something, aren't you? Elijah realized suddenly. All those questions about whether Miss Sullivan could stay on at the ranch, the way you've been showing off your best behavior. Lucas had the grace to look slightly abashed. We just want you to be happy, Pa. And she makes you smile again. Before Elijah could respond to this startling assessment, Michael came racing up the hill, Tessa following at a more dignified pace. Pa, I skipped a stone 3 times. Miss Sullivan says that means good luck. Elijah ruffled his younger son's hair, buying time to compose himself after Lucas's frank discussion. Does it now? And what kind of luck might we need? The kind that keeps good things from leaving. Michael answered with the guileless wisdom of childhood, casting a meaningful glance at Tessa as she rejoined them. Elijah caught Lucas hiding a smile and realized he'd underestimated his son's capacity for matchmaking. The thought should have annoyed him, but instead, he found himself wondering if they might be right. The schoolhouse was finished on a Tuesday. Tessa stood inside the empty building, admiring the fresh-cut lumber of the desks, the gleaming new chalkboard, and the small but adequate living quarters attached to the back. After weeks at the Diamond W, the space felt confining rather than liberating as she'd expected. It's real nice, ain't it? Mr. Johnson, the head carpenter, beamed with pride. Best schoolhouse in 3 counties, I'd wager. It's lovely, she agreed, running her fingers along a desktop. You've done remarkable work. We'll bring your trunks from the Whitaker place tomorrow, if that suits. Get you settled in proper before classes start Monday. Tomorrow, she echoed, her stomach sinking at how final it sounded. Yes, that would be fine. She walked back to where Elijah waited with the wagon, having insisted on bringing her to inspect the finished building. He stood with his hat in his hands, unusually fidgety. It's well constructed, he said when she approached. Johnson does good work. Yes. She twisted her gloves in her hands. They'll bring my things tomorrow. So soon. A shadow crossed his face before he masked it. The boys will be disappointed. Only the boys. She wanted to ask, but courage failed her. I've grown quite attached to them as well. An awkward silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. Since the picnic 3 days ago, something had shifted in their interactions, a heightened awareness, a tendency for their eyes to meet and hold a moment too long, a brush of hands when passing the salt that neither hurried to end. Tessa. He cleared his throat. There's something I've been meaning to discuss with you. Her heart skipped. Yes. The boys have become accustomed to their lessons at home, and with winter coming on, the ride to town will be difficult some days. He spoke rapidly, as if he'd rehearsed this speech. I wonder if you might consider continuing to stay at the ranch, at least through the winter. You could teach in town during the day and return evenings. We would provide transportation, naturally. It wasn't what she'd hoped to hear, yet wasn't entirely disappointing either. That's very practical, she said carefully. But people might talk. Let them. His jaw tightened. Your reputation would be protected. Mrs. Jenkins is always present, and no one who knows me would dare suggest impropriety. That was true enough. Elijah Whitaker's integrity was unquestioned in Sweetwater. Still, a single woman living in a widower's home, regardless of circumstances. I'll consider it, she finally said. It's a generous offer. He nodded, looking simultaneously relieved and disappointed, though at what, she couldn't guess. They rode back to the ranch in silence, each lost in private thoughts. That evening, as Tessa supervised the boys' reading hour in the parlor, Lucas suddenly closed his book with uncharacteristic abruptness. Miss Sullivan, he began, exchanging a glance with his brother. We need to ask you something important. Very important, Michael echoed solemnly. Tessa said aside her mending. I'm listening. Are you planning to go back to Boston after the school term? Lucas asked. The question caught her off guard. I haven't decided yet. My contract is for 1 year. But you could stay, Michael pressed. If you wanted to. I suppose I could. She studied their earnest faces. Is that what you'd like? Yes, they answered in unison. But more importantly, Lucas continued, lowering his voice conspiratorially. We think Pa wants you to stay too. Forever, not just for school. Tessa felt her cheeks warm. Lucas, that's not a proper thing to speculate about. It's not speculation, he insisted. I asked him directly at the picnic. Her heart nearly stopped. You what? I asked if he thought you were perfect for us. Lucas looked smug. He didn't deny it. That doesn't mean, and he watches you all the time, Michael added helpfully. Like how Mr. Patterson looks at Mrs. Patterson when she wears her Sunday dress. Boys, she tried again, flustered by their forthrightness. Your father's feelings are his own private matter, and it's not appropriate for us to discuss them this way. But what about your feelings? Lucas pressed. Do you like Pa? Could you love him maybe? And us? The direct question demanded honesty. These children had lost one mother already. She wouldn't mislead them about something so important to their hearts. I admire your father very much, she said carefully. He's a good man, an excellent father, and I've grown quite fond of him. And I already cared deeply for both of you. Then why are you leaving tomorrow? Michael's lower lip trembled. Because it's the proper thing to do, she explained gently. I came here to be your teacher, not to. She trailed off, uncertain how to explain adult propriety to children who saw the world in simpler terms. But you could be both, Lucas argued. Our teacher and our. The parlor door opened, cutting him off as Elijah entered. He took in the scene with a questioning look. What's this? Reading time seems to have turned into a serious discussion. We were just talking about Miss Sullivan's plans, Lucas said, giving Tessa a significant look, which include returning to my own lodgings tomorrow, as arranged, she added firmly, standing up. And it's past Michael's bedtime. Shall we continue a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court tomorrow? But you'll be gone tomorrow, Michael protested. I'll only be in town, not in Connecticut, she reminded him with a smile. You can visit the schoolhouse anytime. Later, after the boys had finally been persuaded to bed, Tessa found herself alone in the parlor with Elijah. The crackling fire and ticking grandfather clock only emphasized the charged silence between them. They're plotting, you know, he finally said, a reluctant smile tugging at his mouth. Lucas has been quizzing me about my feelings toward you with all the subtlety of a stampeding bull. She laughed softly, relieved he'd broached the subject first. Michael informed me that you watch me the way Mr. Patterson watches his wife in her Sunday dress. Good Lord. Elijah covered his face with his hand, but not before she caught his embarrassed smile. I apologize for their meddling. Don't apologize. It's rather sweet, actually. She hesitated, then took a risk. Is it true? He lowered his hand, his blue eyes suddenly intense. That I watch you? Yes. Far more than is proper for a gentleman. The frank admission sent heat rushing to her face. Oh, which is precisely why you should move into town tomorrow, he continued, his voice roughening. Because every day you're here, it becomes harder to remember that you're my son's teacher, not. Not what? She whispered, hardly daring to breathe. Not mine to care for. He stood abruptly and moved to the fireplace, gripping the mantel as if to steady himself. I'm a simple man, Tessa. I run cattle, raise my boys, and try to do right by my neighbors. I don't have fancy words or Boston manners. I didn't come west looking for Boston manners, she said softly. He turned to face her, conflict evident in his expression. What did you come looking for? The question hung between them, demanding truth. She rose and moved closer, close enough to see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, the slight tremor in his usually steady hands. A fresh start. A place where I could matter. She gathered her courage. I wasn't looking for you, Elijah Whitaker, but I found you all the same. His breath caught. For a long, suspended moment, neither moved. Then slowly, giving her every chance to retreat, he raised his hand to her cheek. Tessa. Just her name, but the way he said it contained volumes. If you leave tomorrow, take my heart with you, because it's already yours. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly at the tenderness of it. Ask me to stay, Elijah. Not as the boy's teacher. His voice was rough with emotion. Not as our boarder. Then how? Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. Instead of answering, he lowered his head and brushed his lips against hers, a question more than a kiss. She answered by raising on tiptoes, her hands finding the solid warmth of his chest as she returned the kiss with gentle certainty. When they finally parted, his arms had somehow encircled her waist, and her hands had moved to his shoulders. Propriety suggested she should step back, but her heart kept her firmly in place. I need time, he murmured, resting his forehead against hers. To do this properly. To court you as you deserve. I'll still move to town tomorrow, she agreed. But perhaps you could call on me Sunday after church? Bring the boys for dinner at my new quarters? He smiled, a full, unrestrained smile that transformed his face. The first of many such visits, if you'll permit. A sound from the hallway made them step apart. Lucas stood in the doorway, attempting to look innocent and failing miserably. I was just getting a glass of water, he claimed, though his triumphant expression suggested he'd seen quite enough. Good night, Pa. Good night, Miss Sullivan. Good night, Lucas. They replied in unison, exchanging guilty but happy glances as the boy retreated, undoubtedly to report his findings to his brother. Well, Tessa said softly, it appears the matchmakers may claim success after all. Elijah's laugh was like sunshine breaking through clouds. They'll be insufferable now. Worth it, she whispered, and was rewarded with another brief, tender kiss before propriety finally reasserted itself between them. When winter blanketed Sweetwater in deep snow that December, few were surprised by the announcement of Elijah Whitaker and Tessa Sullivan's engagement. The Diamond W Ranch became a gathering place for Sunday socials, with the schoolteacher and the rancher hosting neighbors for music and fellowship that brightened the long, cold evenings. Their spring wedding was the event of the season. Lucas stood proudly as his father's best man, while Michael took his role as ring-bearer with uncharacteristic seriousness, at least until the moment came to present the rings, when excitement overcame dignity and he nearly dropped them in his haste. Reverend Thomas had just pronounced them husband and wife when Michael tugged at his father's suit jacket. Pa, he whispered loudly enough for the entire congregation to hear. Does this mean Miss Sullivan is our mother now? A ripple of affectionate laughter moved through the church as Elijah lifted his son up. It means Miss Sullivan is now Mrs. Whitaker, and yes, she's your mother in every way that matters. Tessa's eyes shimmered with happy tears as she embraced first Michael, then Lucas, who whispered, I told you so, in her ear with brotherly smugness. That evening, After the celebrations had ended and the boys were finally asleep, Elijah and Tessa stood on the porch of what was now truly their home, watching stars appear in the vast Montana sky. "Happy?" he asked, his arms secure around her waist. "Completely." She leaned into his embrace. "Though I feel I should warn you. Your sons have already informed me they expect a sister by next spring." His startled laugh was followed by a kiss that held both promise and passion. Always plotting, those two. But in this case, "Yes," she prompted, her heart full to bursting with love for this man and the family they were building. "In this case, I find myself in complete agreement with their plans." He drew her closer still. "They were right about you being perfect for me, for us, and love proved them right," she whispered against his lips as the Montana night wrapped around them like a blessing. Two souls who had found each other across a continent, beneath the endless western sky.